In this video, we'll take a look at how to prepare 16 times E1 cables for NetEngine 8000M series routers. These cables are 75 ohm or 120 ohm trunk cables used by the 16 times E1 interfaces on NetEngine 8000M series routers. We'll show how to prepare a 75 ohm 16 times E1 cable and a 120 ohm 16 times E1 cable separately. First, let's take a look at the structure of a 75 ohm 16 times E1 cable. Each of the inner coaxial cables consists of the internal conductor, insulation layer, shield layer, and outer jacket. The 16 times E1 cable consists of 16 pairs of coaxial cables, with one coaxial cable for transmitting and the other for receiving in each pair. The internal conductor is called the tip side, and the shield layer is called the ring side. Here, tip indicates the positive pole, and ring indicates the negative pole. Next, let's take a look at how to prepare cables. The steps involved include stripping the outer insulation, identifying and sorting the coaxial cables, and preparing the core wires. The tools required include the wire strippers, diagonal pliers, crimping pliers, tweezers, soldering iron, tin wire, heat shrink protective sleeve, and hot melt glue gun. Connectors such as SMB and BNC can be used. Here, we'll use SMB connectors. Step 1. Strip an appropriate length of the outer insulation off the cable. The stripped cable is shown here. Step 2. Identify and sort the coaxial cables. In a 75 ohm 16 times E1 cable, there are two types of coaxial cables according to wire sequence: R, receive, and T, transmit. Find the corresponding coaxial cables based on the target interface number, cable labels or silk screens, as well as the pin assignment table in the NetEngine 8000M product documentation. For example, R1 and T1 form a transmit-receive pair. Step 3. Prepare core wires. To do so, 1. Insert the crimping sleeve into a coaxial cable, and then use wire strippers to remove an appropriate length of the cable's outer jacket. Use tweezers to separate shield wires from the internal copper wire. 2. Use wire strippers to remove an appropriate length of the internal copper wire's insulation layer to expose the inner conductor. 3. Use a soldering iron and tin wire to solder the copper wire of the inner conductor, approximately 2 mm exposed to the inner jack of the coaxial cable connector. Avoid directly connecting the copper wire to the GND end. 4. Slightly shorten the shield layer to avoid direct contact between this layer and the soldering point of the connector. Otherwise, a short circuit may occur. 5. Push the crimping sleeve towards the SMB connector until it covers both the SMB outer conductor and the shield layer of the coaxial cable. 6. Use crimping pliers to crimp the crimping sleeve. 7. After the crimping is complete, use the heat shrink protective sleeve to protect the crimping sleeve. Finally, check the cable. You can use a multimeter to test cable connectivity. If the meter transmits and receives signals normally, the cable is normal. Otherwise, check whether the wire sequence is correct. Next, let's take a look at how to prepare a 120 ohm 16 times E1 cable. It's similar to preparing a 75 ohm 16 times E1 cable. The key difference is that the 120 ohm 16 times E1 cable is a balanced twisted pair cable, with no distinct positive and negative poles. You can either cross or parallel the wires when preparing the cable. The tools and materials required include the wire strippers, crimping pliers, and RJ45 connectors. Step 1. Strip the outer insulation. Strip an appropriate length of the outer insulation off the cable at both ends. The stripped cable is shown here. Step 2. Identify and sort the wires. A 120 ohm 16 times E1 cable consists of 32 twisted pairs, which are divided into 4 bundles using cable ties. That is, each bundle has 8 pairs. The 2 bundles with blue cable ties are T0 to T7 and R0 to R7, and the 2 bundles with orange cable ties are T8 to T15 and R8 to R15. For example, we can insert the R0 blue-white and T0 orange-white twisted pairs from a bundle with blue cable ties into pins 1, 2, 4, and 5 of an RJ45 connector. For details about the wire sequence, see the 16 times E1 cable pin assignment table in the NetEngine 8000M product documentation. Step 3. Crimp the cable. Insert the core wires into the RJ45 connector, check whether the wire sequence is correct, and check whether each core wire reaches the end of the RJ45 connector. Then, use the crimping pliers to secure the core wires. Note that there is no standard wire sequence for interconnection. Crimp the cable according to the wire sequence required on site. Finally, check the cable. Use a multimeter to measure the connectivity between the 16xE1 connector and RJ45 connector. If the meter transmits and receives signals normally, the cable is normal. Otherwise, check whether the wire sequence is correct. That's all about how to prepare the 16xE1 cables for NetEngine 8000M series routers. Thank you for watching.